So, Arpin, we are at the end of November, which we could call also the end of Movember, and there are some attempts at mustaches in this Montreal Canadiens locker room. David Savar's mustache is glorious. You're probably going to keep it beyond November, but there are some other guys whose mustache is not so glorious. The other day, I was talking to Savard about his mustache, and Caden Primo overheard me when I said the word handlebars, and obviously he picked it up, even though I was talking to him in French. And as I was leaving the room, and he turned to me and he said, "How about me? You're not asking me about my mustache." And Primo's face being what it is, he's got a
Yeah.
long ways to go uh, before growing a proper mustache. It says something about the team, no?
Well, it's he's not the only one who can't grow a mustache on this team. There's a bunch of guys who are
Yeah,
trying. Caulfield is so. He's getting there, but there's a lot of guys who are trying to grow a mustache and just can't. And that's
it
a young
says
team. It's
that's
yeah.
it. It's
If you want something that can define this edition of the Montreal Canadiens, it's a team that couldn't grow a mustache. So
yeah,
that's
exactly.
where they're at.
It's not, they don't have like 23 Mark Barbarios, people that
No,
have to shave 3 times a day.
no, no.
Like,
I don't know if Lane Hudson has ever shaved in his life. I'm not sure.
oh, well, he's not the worst though on this team though. It's got that little anyway. This thing.
Hmm.
Arpin, you are in Newark, even though the Canadians are playing in New York
Well,
tomorrow.
I'm back
That's
in New York. I'm back in New York now.
there
I
you
was in
go.
New York. I was in Newark earlier. Yes.
Smart man.
Yes.
You might want to move where the fun is. But you had to
I
go
want
to
to leave Newark before Sundance. So
yeah. Yeah, good move. Veteran
yeah,
move. Yeah.
yeah.
So what happened before we get into today's topics? I'm just curious to know what you saw at practice. What was the main takeaway from it?
Well, I think it was a pretty standard practice. Working on some offensive zone things. Kind of getting shots to the front and having guys there to tip pucks. To continuing the work they've done on their offensive game ever since sort of shoring up their defensive game. So that continued today. But a couple of interesting things. Patrick Laine was rotating in and out of Nick Suzuki's line at practice, so he would take Caulfield's shift, Newhook's shift, even Suzuki's shift sometimes. And so that was interesting. I don't know how much we can read into that, but Marty,
Not the first time he does that.
not the
It,
first time he does that. So maybe
no.
that's something that we can expect as soon as he comes back. When's he going to come back? Marty was kind of standoffish, but did say he had to talk to Rammer, which is Jim Ramsey, obviously the head athletic trainer. So if it gets to the point where he's got to talk to Rammer, then that's got to mean it's getting close. This was a full practice.
Yeah.
He had no restrictions. They play in Boston on Sunday, obviously New York on Saturday. I'm pretty much guaranteed he's not going to play in that game, but Sunday, who knows? And there was a little bit of a tell earlier this week when Marty was asked if Patrick Laine, we might see him this week. And then someone mentioned the slate of games and included the game in Boston. He's like, oh, does Sunday count for this week? So when he said that he wouldn't play this week. So let's see what happens on Sunday. But he's getting closer. Had a bit of
Yeah.
a scare today that had a big collision with Justin Barron during a drill. Everyone kind of held their breath and thought that maybe it looked like it could have been a knee on knee.
Jeez.
Didn't turn out to be anything, but that was a bit of a scare. The other big thing to come out of practice, actually, a couple of things on two kind of younger defensemen. It doesn't look like Jaden Struble is going to be in on Saturday. Justin Barron's going to get, I guess, another lease on life. Mike Matheson looked like he was ready to return. The Canadiens were non-committal on that and wouldn't actually make Matheson available to speak because he's technically not been cleared to play. But he took a regular shift with Lane Hudson with Lane Hudson on a pairing. So he seemed like a guy who's on the verge of returning. But Jaden Struble looks like he's coming out. Marty St. Louis was talking about how his ceiling, his good is really good, but he's got to raise his floor. His floor is really bad. He talked about urgency, talked about him needing to understand that every play matters, that your first shift could be a play that affects the game.
Mm.
And I don't know the extent to which he didn't get into the details of it, but when you look at that Mathieu Olivier goal in Columbus, uh, a lot of people looked at Barron losing Olivier in front, but if you look at the initial sort of pressure that Struble put on the puck in the corner, his stick's not even on the ice. That urgency isn't there. So you get the impression that Marty kind of felt that pass never should have been able to get out of that corner to begin with. And so
Well,
um, I,
if he had like three stronger strides by reading the play properly and showing the proper urgency, he might have been first on that puck.
yeah,
Oh,
and even if you just have your stick on the ice, you might deflect that pass, and
yeah.
really you should be putting your stick on the puck. So there was a lot not to like, and so I think that's it. Is that the variance in Struble's game is what Marty was talking about, and it was pretty blunt about it. Um, I didn't get a chance to speak to Struble because I was having another conversation with someone else, and so looks like he'll probably be out on Saturday, unless Matheson can't go, obviously, in which case it would be the third time this season where Struble is slated to be scratched and gets another stay of execution, if you will, because of an injury. The other guy was Lane Hudson. That Marty was pretty interesting talking about just, and this is something that we both have talked about in terms of where Hudson's improved in the sense that picking his spots better, knowing when to join the rush, not doing it every single time. And that's what Marty was talking about. Is like I want him. He's like he wants to be on the rush all the time, and I want him to be on the rush. He's dangerous. I want that, but you got to pick your spots. And what was interesting to me is that I asked him, the play in the Utah game that led to the 2-on-1, the tying goal, where Hudson goes to pick up that rim
Oh, on his backhand, and then
on his
basically,
backhand,
yeah,
and a
yeah,
puck jumps
misses the
over his
puck.
stick, and then it's two
Yeah,
on one the other way.
yeah.
And I asked Marty, I was like, okay, well, was that a mistake or was that just a bad bounce? And he was like, no, that's an example of him always wanting to be on the rush when he doesn't need to be. He's like, Slav was right next to him. Slav could have gone after that puck. He put himself in a bad situation, and that put us in a bad situation. So that's something to monitor. I don't think listen, he was skating with Mike Matson at practice. I don't think Lane Hudson's ice time's going down anytime soon, but something to monitor in terms of his progression here. Um, and otherwise, line stayed the same at practice. Basically an endorsement of how the team played in Columbus. Um, Kirby Doc, I don't want to make too much of a practice, but Kirby Doc had a great practice. Like honestly,
Okay.
like really looked good. Made like a couple of outstanding plays. He had one play where he came in off the side to Montembeault, and he was like a sharp angle. He put the puck between Montembeault's stick and his pad, picked it up on the other side, and tucked it into the open net, which is a very unique move that I don't really recall too many guys seeing. Using the triangle on the goalie,
Yeah.
that's pretty rare. And then he doubled back, batted a puck out of the air as the other. It was like a 2-on-2 drill, and they were trying to exit the zone. Puck batted it out of the air and sent Jake Evans in on a breakaway, and he got stoned by Montembeault. But still, it was like kind of an example, like two examples of things Kirby Doc does really well when he's feeling good is the great puck play at the net, and then the great kind of puck retrieval or preventing a team from exiting their own zone. Both happened in one sequence, and I just thought he looked really good during practice. And Marty afterwards, I asked him if the toilet paper roll is gone for Kirby Doc. And he's like, it's getting there. Yeah, he's taking a wider view of the game. It's not quite there yet. It hasn't led to production, but he's on the right track. So
Well, you don't want
what
to read
happens?
too you don't want to read too much into a practice, but we've seen a lot of practices lately in Brassard where he was grumpy, he was
Hmm.
obviously in a bad mood, and then it translated to the game. So
Yeah.
just even though the things that he accomplishes in practice are not necessarily an indication of what's to come on the ice, but the mood itself, if he shows that he's in better mental disposition, that might translate.
Mhm.
So it's encouraging in that
It could
sense.
be. It definitely like the whole vibe around him was not what you just described. It was the
Yeah,
opposite. So let's see. Let's see if this is a bit of a turning point. Honestly, like since he got moved back to center, I feel like his game has improved
yeah,
significantly. So yeah, let's see what happens.
that's good. So listen, we so the Canadians play against the Rangers. The interesting story going on with the Rangers these days. So, well,
Yes.
I'm really wondering if the Canadians are going to be uh, pounding on a team that's vulnerable for its own self-inflicted reasons,
Yeah.
or if they're going to face a team that's determined to put this behind them and come back to their winning ways. So, but what's for sure, notwithstanding the opponent, is that the Canadians have been playing better. The
Hmm.
last 7 games have been a stark contrast compared to before. So since November 11, so the game, that crazy game in Buffalo that they won 7-5, they've gone 4-2-0, 4-2-1. I'm sorry,
Hmm.
and I've dug some stats that I think are very revealing into how things have gone in the first 15 games versus how they've been the last 7. So in the last 7 games, the Canadians are ninth in the league in terms of expected goal percentage. They're at 52%.
Hmm.
Before that, in the first 15 games, they were 31st in the
Yeah.
league at a shade over 42. They're 10th in high danger chances ratio, which usually goes hand in hand with the expected goals. They're 8th in shots against. They were before in the first 15 games they were 28th. They shaved off roughly 5 shots a game. The
Hmm.
interesting thing though is that they've reduced their own number of shots too. That's where they're still struggling. They're dead last in terms of shots per 60, but it seems as though they're winning in terms of the trade-off of spending less time in their own end and giving less to the opponent, even though they're not going to be as menacing. This is a team, considering when you look at what they've got in terms of firepower in their current state, they're likely to have a better record if they just tighten things up defensively than if they start trusting an offense that doesn't really compare with the real good teams in the league. So, yes, they've shot a lot less lately. They've missed the net a bunch.
Hmm.
And despite the fact that they're dead last in terms of shots, their their chances are they're getting the upper end in terms of chances. So everything has been pointing in the right directions lately, and so it's not just the matter that they've all of a sudden they're playing against weaker opponents, or they had nowhere to go but up, or things like that. Yes, they're 4-2-1, but their process seems to be a lot more encouraging right now.
Yeah, and this whole thing about weaker opponents, like Montreal's one of the weakest opponents in the league. Okay, so there are no weak opponents for the
Yeah,
Canadians. So yes, they beat Columbus twice in that span, and they beat Columbus, I think, 8 times in a row, dating back to several years, I guess now. Um, so, but and one of those losses was obviously the Vegas loss, one of the regulation losses, but the other one was in Minnesota, where they played, I think, one of their better games
yeah,
this
very well.
season.
Yeah, very well.
So, whereas the win in Buffalo was not one of their better games, but so it's wins and losses are all relative, but yeah, I think the process is a lot better. And when you look at the game in Minnesota, both games against Columbus, the game against Edmonton, and even the game against Utah, even though a lot of people were upset, obviously the shot total was pathetic, but there was a lot of good in that game, and Utah and Columbus in particular are like two teams that are doing exactly what the Canadians hope to do this season. There are two teams that are still in the mix at this point of the season because they're playing roughly 500 hockey, and it's commendable what they've done. And Utah is a fast team. We saw the team we saw at the Bell Center on Tuesday. That's a style the Canadians could play. I mean, it really they're not they don't have way more offensive talent than the Canadians do, and so to me, the way the Canadians performed in that game was a good sign.
Yeah,
Yes, they give up a 2-on-1. They give up the tying goal in the third period. That's not great. Obviously, the overtime goal is what it is. But still, it's to me globally, these 7 games show a process of getting towards some semblance of what they hope to be, and it's good to see them sort of string that out and they still haven't won more than two in a row. There's still problems. The offensive stuff, like when I was mentioning what they were doing in practice and stuff, um, they know, like the fact that they were practicing working the puck back to the point and funneling to the net and tipping pucks. That's the formula to getting more shots on net, is just throwing pucks at the net and hoping you get a bounce, which is kind of the building block of creating more dangerous shots off of those opportunities. Um, so yeah, I would agree. But this weekend's a big test. As bad as New York's been going, and they lost in Philly today, 3-1, and they're in full on public crisis mode that is entirely of their own doing. And then in Boston on Sunday afternoon, another team that's reacted well to the firing of Jim Montgomery, frankly, and are looking okay. Um,
Well, they're not
that's
giving up much anymore. You
No,
know,
they're not. And so this is a big test for Montreal, obviously. And interestingly, I know that Martin St. Louis today said that Caden Primo is slated to play in Boston, so they're not going to go back to back Saint Montembeault.
yeah.
We should see Caden Primo, barring anything unusual, like barring Monty getting pulled on Saturday against New York. We should see Caden Primo on Sunday against Boston.
Well, it means that he had a successful enough outing in Columbus in order for the coach to commit to him right away.
It's a
There's
good way
no
to put it. Successful enough.
yeah,
It was successful enough. It was fine.
yeah. That's
It
I
was
mean
fine.
he was fine. He was not great, but
But
he was
it was the first time Primo played behind this version of the team. That's
hmm
something that people need to keep in mind. Every other game Primo played was behind a version of the Canadians that were a complete defensive mess. And so, this makes life easier on their goaltenders. And Sam Montembeault's performance is a big, that's a big reason for that as well. Like he gave up 6 against Vegas because again, the Canadians reverted back to this version of what they were a couple of weeks prior, and that's what happened. It was just grade A after grade A after grade A off turnovers, and so that's your goalie's not going to survive that, whether you're Sam Montembeault or Caden Primo or Igor Shesterkin or what have you. It's just not a winning formula.
so I don't know if it was like a week ago or maybe more than that, but a few episodes ago you said, what I would like to see is for the Canadians to play 500, be back at 500 on time for Christmas.
Mhm.
So I don't know if they're going to manage to keep that current pace of the last 7 games. If they do, obviously, eventually they'll be able to reach 500.
Well,
Um,
if they do that over their next 7 games, it would be what, 12, 13, and 4.
yeah, they'd be
So they'd
knocking
be
at
right
that
they'd
door.
be right there. Yeah.
Yeah, and yet, I mean, despite the fact that things are things look better, I feel as though the anger towards Martin St. Louis, the questioning of the whole rebuild, and the finger pointing at this player or that player is not going away. The level of trust towards the improvement of this team and how it goes about improving seems way down right now. And you always need to take a step back. Say, wait a second, it's not as dire as people make it to be. You know.
No, well, it's all relative, right? And like, how many times have we said, like, we're going to judge this team based on their own expectations of themselves, right?
hmm
That's been my mantra. We've discussed it on the show. If you tell us that this is what you expect of yourselves and you don't reach that, then that's the lens through which I'm going to view the progress of this team. And frankly, over the last 7 games, they have gotten closer to the version of themselves that they told everyone to expect.
Yeah.
Um, so but I think because the first 10 games were so horrendous that expectation being not only not met, but not even being close to being met. Like they looked way worse than the team that finished last season. They were considerably worse.
Yeah.
So I think that's where you see a lot of the lack of patience with Martin, a lot of the questioning of he's an inexperienced coach, and like all the doubt that surrounded his hiring to begin with, way back when, almost 3 years ago now, um, is bubbling up again. Pee wee coach, this, that, is he really the guy for this? And the thing is that like when Marty says we're not in a purely developmental phase anymore, we're in a learning how to win phase. This was always going to be the phase that was going to be a challenge for him because as a purely developmental coach, where he doesn't have to worry about results, he doesn't have to worry about team success, but he's working with guys to develop them. That's his wheelhouse, right? That's a position for him to succeed in.
Yeah.
This part's the tricky part, not just for Marty, but for the organization as a whole, for the players, for the management, for him. This is the tricky part, is how do you go from learning how to win mode to knowing how to win mode? That's the tougher slog. They're only at the
As a
beginning
coach,
of it.
yeah, he knows it as a player, but as a coach, it's different because
Yeah.
he, with the team transitions to that new phase, he measures himself against the other coaches, and the margin we keep hearing how the margin between winning and losing is so small in the NHL. Well, it's not when you're not just in the pure teaching mode anymore and in
Hmm.
the learning how to win. He has to match up against the other NHL coaches every night in that sense, and that's
Well,
a more difficult edge to gain.
well, yeah, and not only that, but he has to he builds a different relationship with his players. He's not as nurturing. He admitted that night that he benched Slav for the second half of the second period that had he been in a purely developmental phase, he would not have done that. He would have just let him play through it. I think the way he talked about Jaden Struble today is another example of it. If he was in a purely developmental phase, he would talk to him, show him
Yeah,
video, show him what he did wrong, and send him right back out there and say, "Show me what you learned." Now, he didn't confirm it, but looking at practice and hearing him talk, it sounded very likely that Jaden Struble is not going to play in New York as a result. And so that's another example, just not in a purely developmental phase. And I think the reason why some players get a longer leash is if you're helping the team win, we'll give you that leash. If you're preventing the team from winning, you're going to take that. We're going to shorten that leash. And so the results being a part of everything is why I think there is this frustration from some fans, not all, but a pretty loud pocket of fans towards Marty because the results aren't there globally.
and some media
And
and
that's why a
some
game
members
like
of the media
Utah,
too.
some members of the media, of course,
Yeah,
but the game against Utah to me is a perfect example. You look at the 13 shots on goal and you think this is pathetic. This is Utah. They're the former Arizona. Like what's become of us and this and that. But it's if you look at it and just take a step back and be like, okay, they lost the game in overtime where they were pretty good defensively except for one mistake, um, leading to that odd man rush that tied the game. Um, then you can question, to me, I saw a whole bunch of people being like, what's Kirby Doc doing out there in overtime? Well, Kirby Doc played a pretty good game that game, and he was put back in
yeah,
the middle. He wasn't perfect, but and so when you see these glimpses of light from players who are struggling, you want to feed that. You want to be like, okay, here you go. Here's a little cookie because you had a good game.
yeah.
Obviously, he winds up getting, Schmaltz winds up going right around him and setting up the winning goal. But still, these are parts. This is part of the thing you have to do when you're trying to straddle development and learning how to win. Doing both at once is complicated, and these are the kinds of decisions that you have to make, and they're not going to necessarily be popular. But I think probably more than Marty, not that he would admit, but that he's saying, they're still in a very developmental phase. Yes, they're wanting to learn how to win, but development is still a key component of Marty St. Louis' job. And in that respect, I look at Arbor Jacki, like how many people were losing their minds over how Arbor Jacki was being treated. Oh, Marty doesn't like him. Oh, the organization, he's going to get traded. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Well, look at him now. Like honestly, like could you have handled that situation any better? Like he's an assertive, confident defenseman.
Yeah.
He's the exact opposite of what he was at the beginning of the season. So there are definite, I think Emil Heineman
My
is
God, he's
is is
this
thriving
is
under
an
this coach,
emerging player. Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah,
that's it. So like
yeah,
there's and like how many coaches would have given Lane Hudson as much leash as he's gotten and
yeah,
let him play through some mistakes and basically, you know, I guess some people could call it like a double standard. Like why does Lane Hudson get to make a mistake and he doesn't have to sit on the bench? Well, because his positives far outweigh his negatives. And at the end, if the ledger's in the positives, then you get to make some mistakes. And If your ledger isn't in the positive because the mistakes outweigh the positives, then eventually you sit. And so I think he's straddling it pretty well. I think he got through his first storm as a coach where he
Mhm.
was being very publicly criticized and questioned pretty well. Never really lost it. Just had that one press conference where he kind of like mentioned like all my life, people who doubted me, that fuels me, all that stuff. Um, so yeah,
I think it
he,
got to him a bit.
I think
You
it
know.
did too, but I think he used it the right way. He didn't
Yeah.
lash out, and he wasn't like he didn't spend like days being like totally defensive with the media and being like really standoffish and all that stuff. Like it didn't. I think it got to him, but he only outwardly demonstrated it once, one day.
Mhm.
It was that one day where he was really kind of combative and defiant in his press conference after practice that day. Otherwise, I think he did actually use it to fuel him, and I think he got his team to start playing some much more sustainable hockey.
Yeah.
Um, but that doesn't mean that he's out of the woods. Like he has a lot of work ahead of him. But we were wondering how he would react to his first storm, and I think he's done it pretty well, generally.
Yeah, it's just to me, it's just I, you mentioned the game against Vegas. I thought he was super interesting on that. In the morning of that game, he said that Vegas had to be a one-off because of all the mistakes
No,
that the Canadians.
it was the morning of the Nets
The
game.
morning of the game against
Yeah,
Utah.
yeah.
Yeah. So he said that that game against Vegas had to be a one-off in terms of the turnovers and that led to their goals. He said, "I don't want to go back. I told the guys I don't want to go back with all those actions that feed off the other team. We've got to go forward and we've got to tighten things up right away." So yes, there were those 13 shots on goal against Utah, but that whole part of the equation, that what he had asked and hoped that his players would do, they responded in properly and made sure that they would not resort back to their bad habits of a month ago, and that we saw again against Vegas. Same thing against Columbus. So
Except for Lane
they're
Hudson.
yes, except for Lane Hudson. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
There's well, I mean, there's been some instances. It's never going to be like a mistake-free game, and
Hmm.
the Baron and Struble made a mistake. It cost a goal. Fine, those things will happen with a young team. It's just that the accumulation, and there's that, but there's also that when there's one goal, one would follow. That's another
Hmm.
thing that I thought against Utah, for example, what was pretty encouraging because they scored first and the Canadians retaliated instead of just give up a second goal right away. They came back. Brendan Gallagher had a super shift. Then it was Struble
Struble.
who
Yeah.
yeah who scored that goal and that tying goal. So eventually, yeah, they lost the game, but I thought that there were positive signs in terms of character and not letting the team getting dragged down. So the
Hmm.
night after, you're in Columbus, and there was they just tipped the scale in their direction. So I see some good, despite the fact that clearly, when you speak about volume of shots and stuff like that, and hitting the net when you're actually in the slot instead of you know hitting it in hitting the glass every time and making it a rim, um, just seizing your opportunities, that they can do a much better job at it. But little by little, it's not completely lost.
No, and obviously, like, listen, Yuri Slafkovsky, the game he had in Columbus, I really see a lot of parallels between what he did in Columbus and what he did last year in St. Louis. Um, he was navigating a similar type of storm right around this time last year. Remember the game in Vegas where he didn't get a shot attempt, and frankly, against Utah, he also didn't get a shot attempt. He was the only player on the Canadiens not to have a shot attempt in that game.
Yeah,
Um, then he played that game in Arizona, it was just as bad. I remember watching him walk off the ice after practice in Arizona and slamming his stick, and he just was
yeah,
outwardly in a bad place. Similarly, I think, we talked to him before the game against Utah. He's like, well, can't get much worse than it was Saturday, right? And it's true. It wasn't worse than it was Saturday, but it wasn't much. That wasn't that much better. Um, so then, so Marty puts him on the line with Dvorak and Gallagher, the one line that Marty said he did not want to touch. replaces Anderson with Slafkovsky. And it got me thinking that game in St. Louis last year, which followed the game in Arizona, was the first game he played with Nick and Cole. And so at the time, that was their most reliable line. I think it was at the time, I think it was Nick, Cole, and Newhook, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? Anyhow, Nick and
Uh,
Cole were their most
yeah,
reliable line, and
right.
Slavkov he put them on there. And this time he put him on with Dvorak and Gallagher. And I asked him after practice today. I was like, "Was that a case of you putting like because he was talking about getting Slavkovsky's consistency up?" I was like, "Well, is that why you put him on your most consistent line?" And he was kind of like, "Yeah, I didn't want to break up that line, but I felt I had to." I was like, "Okay, well, was that the reason?" He's like, "Yes." And so it's the second time in it's like almost exactly a year apart where he takes him and picks a moment where, okay, I'm going to put you in a situation to succeed. Now go succeed. And he did. Even though against St. Louis last year, he did score, but he scored on the power play and he was on the second power play. He didn't actually score with Nick and Cole in that game. And he didn't actually stay on that line. It took a few weeks before that line fully formed last year, but this was another case where it just like his line mates brought something out of him. Not to say that he's going to permanently be with Dvorak and Gallagher. I'd be shocked if he were.
Yeah.
But the mindset, the thinking for Marty was the same, and I found that interesting.
Yeah, I mean, a year ago we were talking about should Slavkovsky go back to Laval for a few games, So
Look
what
at the comments. Look at the comments on Substack. There are people who are suggesting in there maybe he should go get a few games in Laval. Like
well,
it's
there
very
you go.
very similar circumstances, honestly. Like so,
Yeah.
and he played
But
a much more like he was much more sure of himself against Columbus, and today at practice was beaming, like looking like the old Slav, where he like
yeah.
really just looked good. Walked in the dressing room at one point. I was talking to Caden Gooley. He walks in. He's like, "Ghouls, we have to go shopping. Hurry up!" And he looked at me and laughed, and then he walked out. And then I was like, "Okay, Caden, I won't keep you too much longer. I'll let you go shopping on Black Friday with your buddy." But I was like, he's a bit of a clown though, right? He's a total clown. So anyhow, that's when he's in his natural state, like he
For
wasn't all
sure.
gloom and doom. Like I think that game really did him a lot of good. So um
Yeah, and you know what? That pass that he made on Caulfield's goal,
mhm.
if he doesn't score that goal first, that's a
The
point I
pass he
made.
probably doesn't even try.
It's exactly. It's a confidence play that a guy who's liberated, who feels
Hmm.
all of a sudden more comfortable about his game, that starts seeing things that he had ceased to see. And just because he was so relieved by that goal that he scored, all of a sudden things open up. Once again is the toilet roll paper, the paper toilet roll that it was not exactly the same issue for him, but it's in the same spirit. So because that pass was brilliant, and the power play was going nowhere, but he made it go somewhere in a hurry. So I
Yeah,
thought it was really a heads
that
up
was
play on his
yeah.
part.
It was, and he caught Columbus getting greedy. They were shorthanded, they were in too deep, and he made him pay for it.
Yeah.
Um,
One thing though,
listen.
before we change topics, I just want to say I'm eating crow. You mentioned Dvorak and Gallagher. I thought
Mhm.
that combination was doomed in the same way that Anderson playing with Cole and Nick is doomed. I thought never anything good could come out of putting Galley with Dvorak, and I must say I was wrong to think that, because those are two players that all of a sudden are playing
Okay,
well. So,
okay,
but
relax. You weren't wrong to think that. Okay, that thought was a perfectly natural thought to have at the time.
yeah,
There's
well, it's just
Gallagher's a different player now. Dvorak, for all the shit he takes from people, is a different player right now, and so, but mainly
that,
Gallagher being a different player right
yeah,
now.
yeah, but that's
It's
what I'm
fine.
acknowledging.
Yeah,
That's
that's fine.
oh no,
But
it's
you
not
don't
that
need
I
to
was
eat. You
wrong
don't need to
back
eat
then.
crow. Yeah, you don't need to
I was
eat
not
crow.
wrong back then. It's just to keep thinking it now would be wrong, because I recognize that right now the results are different, and I don't know if it's because of Gallagher, but even Dvorak, I think he's playing better hockey. He's moving his feet better too. So
He's a smart hockey player, man. Like that's what he is. He's not spectacular. He's not going to wow you. He just is consistently in the right position. He he makes plays defensively. He knows how to play the game.
mhm.
He's not the offensive player he was in Arizona. He never will be. That's just who he is, and who he is right now is a pretty darn good 200-foot hockey player who doesn't kill, he doesn't hurt you in the offensive zone, and he helps you tremendously in your own zone, and he helps you in the faceoff circle. That's what he is.
And that's what you're going to sell at the trade deadline.
Well,
Okay.
yeah. Well, it's a very marketable player at the trade deadline. Honestly, like there are a lot of teams who would love to have a center on their fourth line who could do all those things.
Yeah.
That's there's no doubt about that.
All right. Where did you want to take us now?
Well, we're going to talk about briefly. I don't know how we're going to do this briefly, but it is 3 years since Jeff Gorton got hired. That
Yes.
anniversary passed yesterday.
Yesterday.
Our buddy Pierre Lebrun talked to Marc Bergevin at length about the 3 year anniversary of him being fired. You guys can go read that at The Athletic. He said a few interesting things, another few other things that are somewhat dubious, but you go ahead and make what you will of it. But 3 years later, where's the rebuild at? I think that's a big question for everyone. Like, are things going the way they should be going? And when I said before, I'm going to judge this team based on their own expectations for themselves, I think that's a different evaluation when you're looking at it from a macro point of view or a big picture point of view with where they're at. And I think, you know, we've expressed our concern over Kirby Doc. This is where they're at, where they're gonna slowly find out if all these pieces that they've acquired are the pieces for the future. So
Yeah.
it's a big like TBD kind of period in the rebuild. I think this administration has done a good job to this point, trying to identify the right players to get, and now we're going to see if they were actually correct. And you never know, because Alex Newhook is a question mark. Doc is still a question mark. There, some of the brighter pieces are pieces they didn't acquire. Cole Caulfield, Nick Suzuki, Caden Gooley. These are all players that came in that Marc Bergevin brought in. So this is a big, I would say like big 12-month period,
Yeah.
maybe 15-month period where we learn what these players that these guys have brought in, what part of the future they're going to represent.
It's I think it goes to show how long a rebuild can be, because when
Yeah.
when you look at how the current roster is built, there's still very there are not a ton of signs of the imprint of Gorton and Hughes on this team. There is in terms of a couple of acquisitions, you mentioned them, in terms of contract decisions, but you look at the roster per se, it's still very much fed by the last few years of the Bergevin and Timmins regime, because
Mhm.
Bergevin had, during his reset period, had started accumulating a lot of draft picks, and you know, Caulfield, Struble, Harvey Pinard, who we are going to see back on the roster on tomorrow on Saturday. I mean, Gooley. We spoke earlier in the season about Luke Tuck being, sooner rather than later a candidate for the fourth line. We saw
Mhm.
Oliver Kapanen at the beginning of the season, Logan Mayus knocking at the door, Joshua was in Montreal. Those are all Trevor Timmins picks.
Yeah.
And so there's still there the proper influence of Gorton and Hughes is more in choosing the direction where the team is going, and with the pipeline that's still to come, more than the actual configuration of what the roster looks like. So it's very much a work in progress in that sense. So because there's the rebuild start when Gorton arrived, with the decision to unload a bunch of players, Tyler Toffoli, Artur Lekanen, and whatnot.
Mhm.
But we're still a ways away from seeing what the true tough decisions as to who to retain, who to let go, who to acquire, and what's the price that we're willing to pay in order to acquire those key pieces that are going to make us better. For now, it's more we're letting that young core grow. And I wonder, we started that episode by talking about how they got better during over the past 7 games. I think
We
the
actually
Canadiens
started it talking about their inability to grow a mustache, but yes.
Yeah.
after
Okay, fine.
that.
2 minutes and a half into the show. Um, but I think that they're very much in this. They're entering a phase where it's like let the chips fall where they may. You
Mhm,
know, they could keep the current pace and improve organically the way that they were hoping for, or they're going to look at Matthew Schaefer, James Higgins, Porter Martone, Michael Misa, and say, you know what, we wouldn't mind drafting top five for one last time. So either way, I think unless
I don't think they can decide to do that though. That's the thing. Is that
well,
they
no, I know, but either it's. I mean, the players will decide. They put it in the hands of the players. Like, show us that you can improve. Basically, show us that there is progression. That's part of it, you know. So if they show that progression and they get higher in the standings, that's great. If they are in the mix, it's going to be mission accomplished. But if they end, I don't think that this administration right now sees drafting in the top five as a failure. Quite the opposite. I think that they see an opportunity that that's still there for them. So
Mhm.
unless something great lands on their lap, I don't expect them to make like a try to make a move to improve themselves for this just for this season. You got Patrick Laine who's coming back. There are players who have struggled in the first stretch of the season who can certainly give you more. This is not a team that's playing at its to the fullest of its ability, but it's almost like it's as weird as it may sound. It's like a no lose situation because either they draft favorably and they get one of potentially one of those four very impactful prospects, or they get better the way that they did. It's just that if they remain bottom dwellers this year, it's harder to convince yourself that they can make such a big jump from this season to next year. If you feel
Yeah.
if
Well,
so, that's where the challenge
I mean,
is.
the whole thing for me is that the term organic growth
Is
is
wishful thinking.
well, it's just thrown out there as if it's just the natural course. It's the natural course of things. Like this is how every player naturally develops. And I think you look at Justin Barron, right? They go out, they trade Arturi Lehkonen. I don't think anyone could have argued. Well, at the time, kind of monetizing Arturi Lehkonen made sense. He's a player who was a better fit on a winning team than he was
Mm-hmm.
on a rebuilding team. And
Yeah.
yes, now 2 years after the fact, you could say, "Oh, wouldn't you love to have Arturi Lehkonen?" Yeah, sure, but they had to sign him to a new contract. They would like it's these are all and we saw him on non-competitive Canadiens teams, and he's not as impactful a player. He's just not. The version you get of Arturi Lehkonen that you get in Colorado, it's not the version of Arturi Lehkonen you would have gotten in Montreal.
He had gotten stale in Montreal to a
Yeah,
certain
well,
extent.
I mean, I don't know. He was impactful in that 21 run. Like he had a good playoffs that year.
Yeah.
Um, but he's just a player who's better when he's surrounded by good players. That's the thing. He can't be surrounded by young players and expect to like kind of lead the charge
Mm-hmm.
and be the same player. So I think it was a natural. I think it was a good decision to trade him. Now, the player they got back is the player I see as being the poster child for like organic growth is not a given. It's like
Yeah.
like it's just Justin Barron is not organically growing. He's right now he's stagnating. There's a certain amount of indecision in his game. It's a lack of progress. And he's not the only player that's going to happen for. Like it's not a given that players are going to be organically growing,
Yeah.
and that's what this season is about. Like we're seeing it with Kirby Doc right now. Is he organically growing? He might, but he was missing a growth spurt there at some point, and people were starting to worry about him, ourselves included. We spent a lot of time talking about it and how badly he needs to organically grow, and we'll see if he comes out of this and grows organically. Um, so that to me is where they're at. Yeah, fine. If they wind up with a top five pick, great. But that organic growth will have taken a huge hit if that's the case. You'll have to excuse me. I'm doing this in the hotel lounge because the lighting was bad in my room and there's people talking. But anyhow,
That's okay. Just tell them to shut up.
yeah, no,
Can't you see? I'm talking. I'm hosting a podcast.
yeah. Don't you know who I am? Don't you
Just-
listen to the Basu Godin Notebook?
Yeah.
What's wrong with
We're
you?
we're big in Brooklyn.
Yeah, that's right.
We're big in Panama. We're big in Panama. I received an email. It seems
I
as
received the
though
same email. Yeah,
we're number one
the number one
hockey
hockey
podcast
podcast,
in Belgium, Panama, and
Israel.
some other Israel.
Yes,
That's
yes, you get
that's weird.
fished. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. On that sensitive note, let's switch to Future Friday.
Yes. Future Friday. Okay, Future Friday this week. We had someone in the Substack chat ask a question about David Reinbacher, and I think it was triggered by my story about him going to get a hot dog at the game. Just
Yeah.
wondering what's going on with him, and so he is in the entourage of the team. He has remained. He's at every game. He attends practice. He does a lot of. He's around, and he still has a long way to go in his rehab. It looks like it's going well, but it's. I was curious to know like to what extent he's actually involved. So I asked Kane Gooley about it today, and this was an interesting kind of anecdote about that. So he was like, yeah, he's always around. It's never a bad day for that kid. He's always smiling. He's always happy, and he's just happy to be around. And I was like, well, how is he like integrating into groups? He's like, well, okay, for example, the team Halloween party. Like he wasn't sure if he should go, and then we're all like, no, you're coming to the team Halloween party. You're on the team. You're coming. You basically you have to come. You don't have a choice. So that was just one way in which you know, I think the group's leaders are trying to make sure he stays integrated, and it shows kind of the importance that he has. Um, on the other hand, I think it's easy because he got hurt this year and he's losing a year of development that people are starting to write him off as a prospect and not really consider. I think we had someone in the Substack chat talk about trading him for David Jiricek or whatever. It's like it's it's important to remember that the organization still thinks very highly of this kid
Very
and
hard.
what he very highly and what he did when he got to Laval last year and played those 11 games in Laval in the heat of a playoff chase, coming off a month of inactivity since his Swiss League season ended, waiting to see if they would have to play in this sort of play out, play out series or whatever relegation series. Um, Came in, stepped right into the lineup, and performed extremely well. And there's two people that I think of, one of whom I spoke to today, which is Emil Heineman. So I went and I asked him, I was like, when he showed up in Laval last year, what were your thoughts of him? And he was like, well, he picked up our system really quickly, started playing well, showed his offense really quickly, and started helping us really quickly. And I was like, well, what one aspect of his game stood out to you? And he was just like the positional awareness that he had made defending easy for him. And it's the
Mm.
way he said it. That's what he said. It made defending easy for him. Now think of what he's saying there. You got a 20-year-old kid who's showing up. It's been basically a month off and walks into an intense playoff chase and is defending easily in the second, arguably the second best league in the world, if not maybe the third. No worse than that. Um, he said
Playing
his
his
position
first playing his first few games in North America,
exactly on the
on
North
the
American
smaller.
ice
That's
and
it.
and the big thing about defending on North American ice, I talked to Adam Ekstrom about this earlier this season, is that the amount of time it takes for a forward to get from the boards to your net is way shorter, and the percentage of forwards going from the boards to your net is way higher. So it's just a mentality and a spatial thing that is difficult to adjust to. And as a fellow European who had already made that transition, for Heineman to say the way he played positionally, he was so smart, it just made defending easy for him. Easier, I think he said. To me was a really telling kind of comment. And then the second guy is JF Will at the end of last season and how convinced he was that Reinbacher would be playing in the NHL this season at some point. Like he was absolutely convinced that Had he begun the season in Laval, he would have finished it in Montreal because that's how impressed he was. And he said that this kid's coachability level is through the roof. You only have to tell him something once, and he goes out and he executes it. And you know who else said that about someone just today? Marty St. Louis said that about Lane Hudson. It's very similar. You don't have to tell him something more than once. So
Right.
I think a lot of people need to just give this kid a chance to let things play out and not get all worked up. And I know it's hard with Matvei Michkov lighting it up in Philadelphia. And you know what, the Canadiens might wind up being wrong on that. There's nothing saying that they won't be. It's just that you need to let it play out a little bit and
Well,
see how
the
it
guy
goes.
cannot make his case if he's hurt and he's not playing. So I think that portion of the perception of the public, especially in light of how Mishkov is doing in Philly, it's bound to look unfavorable for the Canadiens.
Yeah,
So for sure, I think that the Canadiens remain comfortably convinced that they made the right pick. In light of the defensemen also that who were available in the 2024 draft, that's another thing that still needs to play out. You
yeah,
know, will it prove better that they drafted Reinbacher knowing that Levshinov was available, knowing that Carter Yakemchuk was available,
yeah,
and I think that you in a few years we'll end up looking at those two drafts as a package. And for example, say, were the Canadiens better off with Mishkov and Yakemchuk, or they were better with Reinbacher and Demidov?
yeah.
And so it's as a combination. Obviously, when they drafted in 2023, they had no idea that they would end up a year later with Demidov. But if you start,
They had a decent idea that they would be in a position to perhaps add him. They couldn't know for sure that they would get him
no,
specifically, but they probably knew they were going to be in a position where their draft slot would line up more or less with where Demidov might go. I think
yeah, but
that was
you cannot plan on
of course
that.
you can't
So,
plan on that obviously, but it was a possibility. Like it was a
yeah,
possibility that I think went into their thinking, and it's but really it's the scarcity of that. We were talking about it last episode, the whole right shot D thing when we were talking about the possibility of trading Matheson for a right shot D. You're not getting as good of a right shot D because he's a right shot D, so that ups his value.
right.
And that was and people freaked out when Ken Hughes said if he wasn't a right shot, we might have gone in another direction. That's just the reality of building a team. Like it's just how it is. And so, but again, that doesn't mean they should not have taken Matvei Michkov. That's a whole different argument. Doesn't mean they shouldn't have taken Ryan Leonard, who is the guy that I probably would have taken in that spot. Like
Yeah,
it doesn't mean any of that. All it means is that this particular kid, the story on him has not been written. It hasn't even been like there's only like 2 pages of his book that have been written. And you want
that's
to
well
get a
put.
few chapters in before you start to determine whether the book is any good or not. So it's like give him some time, and this is not a completely lost year. Yes, would it be better if you were playing? Obviously. But there are things that he's taking in about being a part of this team, and he's being made a part of the team. He's being made a part of the group. Learning just coaching here, doing video, things like that. There are lots of ways, and just being at the games and interacting with his teammates and becoming a part of the team. Gooley was kind of like, listen, you guys have talked to him. He's a shy guy. He's a shy guy with us too. But he's slowly loosening up around us, and we're seeing that smile more often, and he feels more comfortable talking and being just saying things. And this is actually something that Caden Gooley is quite good at. Is his whole life he's always been the guy who's kind of brought people out of their shell and brought them into the group, and so he's kind of
Yeah.
taken on that challenge with Reinbacher and made sure that he comes to the Halloween party, for example.
But when you say that the season's not completely lost, I would argue though that for all the discussions that were around Patrick Laine's injury and the fact that the Canadiens' offense is not where it could be because he has not been there, you could really make an argument that between the two injuries, big picture wise, Reinbacher's injury
Yeah,
is more significant than Liney's.
yeah, for sure, 100%. Big picture wise, it's not even close. Even small picture wise, like if Reinbacher hadn't been injured, even if he didn't finish the season in Montreal, which he very well might have, there's no doubt he would have started next season in Montreal.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I really don't see a scenario in which, unless he manages to come back in time to finish the season with the Canadiens somehow, I don't know how, but I don't see a scenario in which he starts next season in Montreal after losing an entire year. Listen, we just,
No.
how much time have we spent talking about Kirby Doc recovering from a year away from hockey? It's the same thing's going to happen to David Reinbacher. He's almost assuredly going to have to start next season in Laval as a result of this injury. And big picture wise, that's a big blow. That's a big. Already, the windows with the forwards and defense weren't going to line up necessarily. So now this kid's maybe not a full year, but he's got some catching up to do. And so he's we might get the peak version of David Reinbacher later than we otherwise would have.
Well, that's it. That's the reason why the that lost season is impactful. But I mean, trading him for David Jiricek would not solve anything. I think that
No,
the Canadiens anyway they won't next year. If Reinbacher was to start the season in Montreal next year as a third pairing right defenseman, you could say that Logan Mailloux would also be a third pairing right defenseman. So the issue is that they won't have anybody to be their second pairing right defenseman, and David Jiricek would probably not be that guy. It's the second administration in Columbus that seems to look at this kid and say, you know what, not so sure. He
second
was
administration, third coach,
third coach. Well, yeah, third coach.
third coach. So not counting Mike
No, no,
Babcock
no.
in that group. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
I
yeah,
mean,
there's definite
if
red
he's not a
flags, but
good, yeah, that's it. So I mean, it could work out. The Columbus is a good example. Um, they picked up Dante Fabro on waivers, and
yeah.
they inserted him in the
Our buddy
lineup.
Chris Johnson said the Canadians are in on that, but I think the Canadians are in on everything. I think if any player becomes available, the
Yeah,
Canadians have made a call. Like you can feel, rest assured that I bet you the Rangers have heard from the Canadians, even though they would have no interest in Kreider and no interest in Trouba. But if they're looking to move a kid like Kako, I'm
hmm.
sure the Canadians would talk about that. Like it would not surprise me in the least. Like they're in on everything. And so when their name gets leaked, or when this is our buddy Chris Johnson who reported that they were in on Jiricek, one of 8 or 10 teams or whatever. Um, do you sense a common thread here? What was the last trade that everyone was shocked that they were in on? Last guy that they were calling about? Um, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. Anyhow, it's during the off season. It was someone that made no sense. Anyhow, it'll come to me
Okay,
at some point. But you should not be surprised when you hear people report that the Canadians are in on this player. If a player is available on the trade market, they will have made a call, if not several.
for sure.
It's a normal course of business. It's what you do when you're in the position that the Canadians are in right now, which is trying to build a winning team. And if a talented player becomes available that could fill a hole on your team, you inquire.
Yeah, but I mean, for the last thing that the Canadians need at this point is a younger younger defenseman.
No, of course, but I mean, maybe you would trade one of like maybe Mayu would go back, or
Yeah,
whoever. Like
yeah,
it's I don't know. I don't know the level of interest, but all I know is that if a player does become available, you can bet your house that Kent Hughes is going to call that team and just start a conversation. Um,
oh, for sure. Well, if Columbus wanted to have Jaden Struble for David Jiricek, sure, why not? But it can be that sort of
yeah,
conversation.
I
So
don't think it's
I
that
doubt
sort of
it.
conversation, but
I doubt it.
they are fact-finding missions, and they are like they want to know. They want to know
Yeah,
what's going on and what it'll take, and they have a lot of assets that teams could be interested in. Like if the Blue Jackets are looking for picks and prospects, the Canadians have tons of those.
yeah,
So, it shouldn't surprise anyone when their name gets linked to any player that's
yeah.
available.
All right, so that's it for today, Arpin. I'm going to let you go in the wilderness of New York City.
Yeah,
So thanks everybody for listening. You can a reminder that you've already started doing so. You can drop us your questions on our Substack chat. Just add the mention mailbag for us. It's going to be easier to find. But there's already, you know,
A
questions that are
bunch.
piling up for this Monday. So
Yeah.
I may make a call for everybody, but we could have enough just with the ones that we already got. So, but it's, I mean, the more the merrier. Otherwise, we'll talk again on Monday after those two weekend games. So
Yeah.
take
Enjoy
care.
the weekend, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving to our American listeners. I guess it's past now, but still, happy Thanksgiving weekend. And yeah, we will talk to you on Monday after this doubleheader on the weekend. Tough weekend for the Canadians. Let's see how they come out of it.
Yeah. All right. Bye bye.